Honestly, Pierce, I think this is the wrong night to be doing this, and I really wish you'd waited to have this segment till after the funerals. This is a time in Colorado and nationally when it would have been better to have more of the segments like you did before with the family, and when people could be unified in helping the victims. Right.
Well, I mean,
now.
if I could jump in there,
we're going to have a debate on this.
Let me just challenge you on that. Let me just challenge you. If I may, let me challenge you on what you've just said. A lot of people have said that today. A lot of people who don't want strengthening gun control have said this is not the day to debate it. I tell you the day to debate it. It would have been yesterday to have prevented this happening. When you have a young man like this able to legally get 6,000 rounds of ammunition off the internet, to buy 4 weapons, including an assault rifle, and for all of this to be perfectly legal in modern America, allowing him to carry out the biggest shooting in the history of the United States, that, I'm afraid, means it's too late for this debate, for those people that lost their lives. So don't patronize me about when we should be talking about the gun control debate. You tell me a good reason why we should not strengthen the law now to stop another young man like him going into a store tomorrow, buying 4 more weapons, 6,000 rounds of ammunition on the internet, and killing and shooting another 70 people in America.
Stand by. You know, the mayor of the biggest city in the country demands more from the presidential candidates on gun control. We've been talking about the politics. Listen.
Soothing words are nice. But maybe it's time that the 2 people who want to be president of the United States stand up and tell us what they're going to do about it. Because this is obviously a problem across the country.
Well, the nation's largest lobby to prevent gun violence, the Brady campaign, echoed that sentiment, saying, here's what they said, quote, "This tragedy is another grim reminder that guns are the enablers of mass killers and that our nation pays an unacceptable price for our failure to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. We don't want sympathy, we want action." CNN contributor John Avalon, back now in New York. So, John, are the candidates' stances on guns, what are they? Tell us about them, and how are they reacting, if at all, today?
Sure. Well, Don, President Obama, for example, supports strengthening some gun laws, except his campaign, his administration offers no specifics. Romney doesn't support adding or strengthening gun laws at all. When he was governor, he actually signed an assault weapons ban, but when you run for president of the Republican Party, you make your pilgrimage down to the NRA, the National Rifle Association. So the reality is, despite a lot of anxiety about gun laws, activists on both sides very engaged, no new proposals to deal with gun violence or attempts to strengthen gun laws from either candidate.
The president came out today first, John, and spoke, and then Mitt Romney, and both campaigns took down their ads in Colorado today, and both candidates changed plans for today. Both addressed the shootings instead of campaigning. Okay, so here's what they said. Listen.
There are going to be other days for politics. This, I think, is a day for prayer and reflection.
This is a time for each of us to look into our hearts and remember how much we love one another, and how much we love and how much we care for our great country.
So, John, I was listening and listening. I'm sure many people around the country were listening as well. No mention of gun regulations. Did that surprise you?
No, because frankly, talking about gun laws right now, Don, has become politically incorrect. This is a conversation we are not having in this country, despite the fact some 10,000 people are killed with guns each year in the United States, too often with these kinds of mass shootings. Even conversations about how we can respect the Second Amendment but take reasonable steps to extend, for example, background checks, to take a look at these extended magazines that allow numerous rounds to be put in place that can kill large numbers of people in short periods of time. That conversation is not happening in politics because it's considered politically dangerous. And it does us a disservice. We have one time tied behind our back to deal with what's objectively a problem, mass gun violence.
And of course, we know the gun lobby in Washington, very influential, John.
It certainly is. And the spending, I think, actually is clarifying for some people. People might not appreciate that the National Rifle Association spends around 10 times the amount that a gun group like the Brady advocacy does. So you've got a 10-to-1 split there. So it's very much an imbalance, and that, of course, affects what politicians do. That affects what they're willing to say. The last president to really take on the NRA was Bill Clinton back in 1994, as you'll remember, who passed successfully that assault weapons ban, which subsequently lapsed. So we haven't really seen action since then, and it's in part due to this disparity about money and influence in Washington.
If we could move on, Mr. Mayor, just to briefly discuss the Trayvon Martin case, because there's a lot of contention now. George Zimmerman's obviously been arrested and charged with second-degree murder. There's a rising debate, not about the race aspect of this, but about the stand your ground law, which exists now in nearly half the states in America. What is your view, as a mayor of a big city in America, of the stand your ground law?
Well, I'm somebody who lives in the state of New Jersey where we don't have such a law. I don't see that it's necessary. You don't have people who are not using deadly force for some reason where a law like that would have advantaged them. So I'm very suspicious of its need, and I think it creates situations often where a person can shoot first and really not have to explain their behavior. But I really want to say something. The gun battle in America is really out of control and very frustrating to me. This is a situation where I believe there was a deep injustice done, and now it seems like the wheels of justice are working in the right way. But I really have no worries about people with law-abiding citizens in the state of New Jersey who have guns. We've only been able to find one shooting the entire time that I've been here that was done somebody that acquired a gun legally. The overwhelming majority of our violent crimes in Newark are done by people who acquire illegal guns. There's so much work we need to do in America in keeping illegal guns out of the hands of criminals. We have a Virginia Tech every single day in this country that's preventable. I wish we could just come together as a nation and focus on those gun laws, that if they were changed, and by the way, I work with a group of mayors that have done polling and shown that the majority of gun owners believe that certain laws should be changed, like background checks at gun shows, like getting rid of the terrorist loophole, that if I'm on the no-fly list in America, I can, and not safe enough to take a plane, I can still go to a gun show and buy a gun, or the fire sale loophole, which means if I get shut down by the ATF for not doing background checks, I can take my entire inventory and sell it to whoever I want. There's all these areas that most Americans agree, that the majority of gun owners agree, that we should change laws to make this nation safer. So I know there's a lot of focus on the stand your ground laws. I have feelings on that. We don't need it here in New Jersey. But what really infuriates me is the level of violence that we have in America that's preventable, and that most Americans, Republican and Democrat, gun owners and not, actually agree on some common sense solutions. But we can't even get together as a nation to do those obvious things that would keep guns out of the hands of criminals.
John, let me start with you. Make the case in a nutshell. More guns, less crime. Counterintuitive to a lot of people watching tonight.
Well, guns make it easier for bad things to happen, but they also make it easier for people to protect themselves and prevent bad things from happening. My research shows that the police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. But if you talk to the police, you'll find that they understand themselves that they virtually always arrive on the scene after the crime's been committed. Look, virtually all of these multiple victim public shootings have occurred in places where guns are banned. And the question that you deal with, we all want to keep guns away from criminals. But when you ban guns, the question is who obeys the laws. And it turns out it's the law-abiding good citizens, not the criminals. And when you have a gun-free zone, it actually serves as a magnet for these attacks. Let me ask you this. Let's suppose a violent criminal, God forbid, was stalking you. Would you feel safer putting a sign up in front of your home that said this home is a gun-free zone? My guess is you wouldn't do that. My guess is even the strongest gun control proponents wouldn't do that. And the answer for why they wouldn't do it is pretty obvious, because a sign like that isn't going to cause the criminal to say, look, I'm not going to attack the person there. The sign actually draws him in because he knows he won't have to worry about somebody stopping, but yet we put those signs up all over the place.
Aaron, I have another sign.
Not in front of your home.
So Bernard,
you'd never do it in front of your home.
Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second for both of you, because I just want Bernard, let me ask you to respond to that. If the laws changed and all of a sudden guns weren't available, do you agree with the principle that people would find another way to get them, or would demand drop?
Well, in the United States, and these gun control laws, or the first federal firearms laws, were the result of the Valentine's Day Massacre in 1933. There are two sets of firearms laws in the country, one that requires absolute registration, such as machine guns, and one in the normal commerce, Part 1 firearms, that do not. Otherwise, there's a legitimate firearms industry. In the United States today, you also have a gray market that is created by the transaction of guns that take place after the legitimate industry. Regardless, this is a major social issue for this country.
Yes.
And there's a lot of self-responsibility issues when it comes to firearms ownership and use.
Roland, you know, a lot of people would like to say, all right, well, if these sales were happening where Bernard said in the gray area, then we could do something about it. But the recent incidents, including this one, did not happen in the gray area. These were people who were buying guns legitimately and in the open and legally.
And this is why I don't focus simply on this type of incident. Just this weekend, let's go back to Chicago. 29 wounded, 5 people killed. In our country, more than 100,000 people every single year are shot and killed. Now, it's interesting we talk about putting signs up. Here's one of the facts from the Brady campaign that they lay out. Every year, there are only about 200 legally justified self-defense shootings in this country. The problem we have in this country, not just that we're flooding guns in the marketplace, we also have, frankly, a culture that is in love with guns. And so we have what is called, the biblical terms, a generational curse. And it's time for this generation to break that curse. And the last thing we need are more Americans running out, buying up more guns, because all that is going to do is to cause people to pop off a lot faster. They will not think twice, and that's one of the problems that we have. That's the last thing we need.
Everybody wants to preserve the right of people that want to use guns for sport, hunting, or target practice to have the right to do so. But that doesn't mean you have an assault weapon. That doesn't mean you have a rifle that's advertised as able to bring down a commercial airliner at 1.5 miles, or bullets that are designed to go through bullet-resistant vests. Those are very different things.
Now, that would be my view entirely, but let's watch what Ice-T, the rapper, said yesterday about his interpretation of the Second Amendment.
The right to bear arms is because that's the last form of defense against tyranny. Not to hunt. It's to protect yourself from the police.
And do you see any link between that and these sorts of incidents?
No. Nah, not really. You know what I'm saying? If somebody wants to kill people, you know, they don't need a gun to do it.
Makes it easier, though, doesn't it?
Not really. You can use you can strap explosives on your body. They do that all the time.
No, there you have the two very different views. I would say there are millions and millions of Americans who would park themselves into Mayor Bloomberg's side of the argument, and millions more, probably more actually in total, who would agree with what Ice-T said. How do you deal with this going forward? How do we deal with the constitutional divide that America has over how that is interpreted?
Okay. Well, I'm going to argue it both ways, because I think you can make a valid argument, sort of, on both sides. Not the last part, that part that Ice-T said about that reducing them wouldn't reduce it. That's been proven. If you reduce the guns and the ammo, you'll reduce the murders. And somebody strapping a bomb on themselves, that's a whole different animal that we have to deal with in these times. But I think, first of all, this must seem odd to people in other countries that we view our Constitution as if it was written by God himself, that it was somehow through some sort of divine intervention or whatever, was etched in stone like Moses in the tablets, and because what they thought was right in 1776 to 1789, that is the way we have to live today in the 21st century. I mean, we wouldn't go to a doctor and have him put leeches on us to suck the blood out of us, because that would cure us. That's what they did, 150 years ago. We kind of evolve.
315 and 314 first.
It's now been 10 days since a lone gunman opened fire on moviegoers in Aurora, Colorado. The airwaves have been dominated by soul searching. Most of the pundits have concluded that the main cause of this calamity is the dark, strange behavior of the gunman. Talking about anything else, they say, is silly. The New York Times' usually extremely wise columnist, David Brooks, explains that this is a problem of psychology, not sociology. At one level, this makes sense, of course, as the proximate cause, but really, it's questionable analysis. Think about this. Are there more lonely people in America compared with other countries? Are there, say, fewer depressed people in Asia and Europe? So why do they all have so much less gun violence than we do?
Command post should be at the door.
The United States stands out from the rest of the world not because it has more nutcases. I think we can assume that those people are sprinkled throughout every society equally, but because it has more guns. Look at this map. It shows the average number of firearms per 100 people. Most of the world is shaded light green. Those are the countries where there are between 0 and 10 guns per 100 citizens. In dark brown, you have countries with more than 70 guns per 100 people. The U.S. is the only country in that category. In fact, the last global small arms survey showed there are 88 guns for every 100 Americans. Yemen is second at 54. Serbia and Iraq are among the other top countries in the top 10. We have 5% of the world's population and 50% of the guns. The sheer number of guns isn't an isolated statistic. The data shows we compare badly on fatalities too. The U.S. has 3 gun homicides per 100,000 people. That's 4 times as many as Switzerland, 10 times as many as India, 20 times as many as Australia and England. Whatever you think of gun rights and gun control, the numbers don't flatter America. I saw an interesting graph in The Atlantic magazine. On a spectrum from yellow to red being the worst, it shows the number of gun-related deaths by state. Now, if you add one more piece of data, gun control restrictions, you see that the states with at least one firearm law, such as the assault weapons ban or trigger locks, tend to be the states shaded in lighter colors, meaning fewer gun-related deaths. Conclusion? Well, there are lots of factors involved, but there is at least a correlation between tighter laws and fewer gun-related deaths. I've shown you data comparing countries and comparing states. Now look at the U.S. over time. Americans tend to think that the U.S. is getting more violent. In a recent Gallup survey, 68% said there is more crime in the U.S. than there was a year ago. Well, here's what I found surprising. The U.S. is actually getting safer. In the decade since the year 2000, violent crime rates fell by 20%, aggravated assault by 22%, motor vehicle theft by 42%, murder by all weapons by 13%. But guns are the exception. Gun homicide rates haven't improved at all. They were at roughly the same levels in 2009 as they were in 2000. Meanwhile, serious but non-fatal gun injuries caused during assault have actually increased in the last decade by 20%, as gun laws have gotten looser and getting weapons has become easier. We are the world's most heavily armed civilian population. 1 out of every 3 Americans knows someone who has been shot. Look, everyone is entitled to his or her own opinion, but not to his or her own facts. Saying that this is all a matter of psychology is a recipe for doing nothing. We cannot change the tortured psychology of madmen like James Holmes. What we can do is change our gun laws.
But the president has to be the leader on this. You know, when he was standing there in front of the microphone in Aurora the other night, you know, he's such a great guy. I mean, he's the heart that he has, the things that he said were so powerful. And yet, when he brought his own children into it, when he said, you know, my 2 daughters go to the movies, and what if it were them? Well, I guess if President Obama is watching right now, and I say this with all due respect, what if it were them? What if it were them last Thursday night? Would you stand at the microphone the next day and say, I feel your pain, and, you know, the existing gun laws, this is what he said, the existing laws are enough. Is that really what you'd say, Mr. President? I don't think so. And you and I and everybody, we have to see these children, these young people who were killed on Thursday night, Friday morning, we have to see them as our children. We as Americans, and this is really where the larger collective problem has to be fixed. We have to see that we're part of each other, and we have to take care of each other. The reason why they have universal health care in Canada and Britain, these other places, because they believe if one suffers, everybody suffers. That is not our mentality. Our mentality is, I got mine, you get yours, and to hell with everybody else. Hell, at least I wasn't in that theater, you know. I mean, we have to stop this. We have to stop this attitude toward each other. And we have to realize that those were our children who are killed. there this past weekend. And if you treat it like that, man, I think if everybody honestly really felt that way, we would have some change in this country, and these politicians would respond quickly. If people would just rise up and say, damn it, this is not the America I'm going to live in. This is too great of a country to let this happen again. I am not going to let this happen again. And I am not going to come on another damn TV show either after the next one of these shootings, Piers, because I haven't done it for 10 years. To be nice to you, and you're a good guy, and you made a good case to me to come on, but I'm sick of this. I refuse it. I refuse to live in a country like this, as I said and before. And I'm not leaving. So therefore, what am I going to do? It's got to change. And I invite Americans who feel the same way as I do, and I believe it's the majority, help me change this. Help everyone change this.
That has nothing to do with liberty. My conception of liberty is not people taking arms and shooting presidents and shooting congressmen. That's a kind of totalitarian approach, a Stalinist approach to liberty. So there is no evidence that I'm aware of that guns protect liberty. There's no evidence that I'm aware of that guns reduce crime. And there's massive evidence that the easy availability of guns has a direct correlation and, I believe, causation with high murder rates in the United States. Also high suicide rates, high rates of accident. The likelihood that somebody in the family will be killed if there's a gun in the house is much higher than the likelihood that that person will use the gun to protect his family. It's a myth.
You're not a statistician. You don't know what you're talking about.
Psychological reasons.
I have to
Americans
respond
like
to his
to hold
attacks on
guns in their hands. You haven't given me a chance to finish my point. You've had all the time to respond. This is junk science at its worst, paid for and financed by the National Rifle Association.
Take that back.
No one should
NRA
believe
hasn't
it.
paid for my research. That's simply ridiculous.
I'm not talking about yours. I'm talking about the research.
You said my research.
And that I said the research that's
you were talking about
is
my
paid
research
for
being the junk
and
science.
Finance. Your conclusions are paid for and financed
That's my
by
conclusions
the
aren't
National
paid for by anybody. Look, you look at
the National
there must be a lot of.
Let me give funds research. Let me give. That's a fact.
Alan, let me give John Lott the last word here, because you have a book in front of you.
Right, from the University of Chicago Press.
And it's headlined, More Guns, Less Crime. Explain to the victims of what happened in Aurora, Colorado, why that premise is true.
Because police can't be there all the time to protect you. It'd be great if they were. My research finds police are the single most important factor for protecting people. But the problem is that even the police understand themselves, they virtually always, as in this case, arrive on the crime scene after the crime's already been committed. Same in Europe. Europe has a lot of multiple victim public shootings that are going on there. Just look at the Norway case from last year, or Germany, or other countries that are there. The UK is.
Germany has on average about 180, 190.
Multiple victim public shootings.
Wait. You keep talking about the multiple occasions we're talking about are the rarity.
Well, that's the reason why we're here right now.
The rarity in any country. My point is this. My point is this. What lessons do you learn from these multiple tragedies? I started this show when Gabby Giffords was shot.
Right.
And I assumed that a congresswoman being blasted in the head would lead to some new form of gun laws. I was wrong. I'm assuming now that in America there is a wake-up call that when a young man is able to arm himself to the teeth perfectly legally and walk into a movie theater and start slaughtering fellow Americans, something is fundamentally wrong with gun laws in this country.
Do you view it an interview show where you talk most of the time?
Oh, well, only when the guest is talking complete nonsense.
In the aftermath of the nearly unfathomable events in Kansas City, that most mindless of sports cliches was heard yet again. Something like this really puts it all in perspective. Well, if so, that sort of perspective has a very short shelf life, since we will inevitably hear about the perspective we have supposedly again regained the next time ugly reality intrudes upon our games. Please, those who need tragedies to continually recalibrate their sense of proportion about sports would seem to have little hope of ever truly achieving perspective. You want some actual perspective on this? Well, a bit of it comes from the Kansas City-based writer Jason Whitlock, with whom I do not always agree, but who today said it so well that we may as well just quote or paraphrase from the end of his article. Our current gun culture, Whitlock wrote, ensures that more and more domestic disputes will end in the ultimate tragedy, and that more convenience store confrontations over loud music coming from a car will leave more teenage boys bloodied and dead. Handguns do not enhance our safety. They exacerbate our flaws, tempt us to escalate arguments, and bait us into embracing confrontation rather than avoiding it. In the coming days, Javon Belcher's actions and their possible connection to football will be analyzed. Who knows? But here, wrote Jason Whitlock, is what I believe. If Javon Belcher didn't possess a gun, he and Cassandra Perkins would both be alive today.